Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the final installment of the Torah, What Will Become of Her with Rabbanit Leah Sarna. I'm really excited for this last class because last week Rabbanit Sarna said that we'd be going out with a bang, and I'm very excited to round out a great series. By now, you all know the drill, so please feel free to turn on your cameras, raise your hands, and put questions in the chat. Rabbanit Sarna.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our last class in the series. So today we're doing my absolute favorite pieces of this. I've taught both of these pieces just like totally independently before in a few different contexts. They're both awesome. So the first thing we're going to do actually two different things, and I think what they accomplish for us are kind of different. The first is we're going to look at the last source we'll look at together in the Gemara. It has a parallel text in Nazir, which I thought about bringing for you. And when I had originally conceived of this class, I was going to bring you the Nazir text also. But I was spending some time with it over the course of this week, and I just said to myself, like, there's one other text that I need to bring instead. And so we're just going to look at the Kiddushin source. And then we're going to round out the series with the source from Esther Rabbah, which has the Torah speaking for herself, which we saw a tiny bit of, but from the tour, which is really late, and Esther Rabbah is much earlier than that. So, and we're going to see what happens when, we saw already then, right? The Torah spoke for herself in the tour, and the Midrash brought by the Torah spoke for herself, and she was effective, right? When the Torah said, the Jewish people, they're going to go into the land of Israel. Like, when are they going to have the time to study me? This is so upsetting. And God says to the Torah, oh, I'm setting you up with Shabbos. We saw that last week. So this week, we're going to see once again the Torah kind of intervening on her own behalf. And that will be how we will round out the series. And that I think will be a really interesting way to get at does the Torah need protection by following that storyline in Esther Rabbah. So that'll be where we end. But when we talk about to introduce our first source, so we're looking at another kind of great Agadita. I think this Agadita is one of like the great, just to give it away from the start, like I think this is one of like the great feminist texts of the Gemara also, and I teach it as such, like with pretty good regularity. It's really one of my favorite Gemaras to teach. I think it's not like one of those usual. I feel like everyone's like, oh, I got to teach a feminist text. Like, let me teach about Bruria. This is not in the pantheon of those, but I think it should be, even though no women speak, no women speak, but they do act in a great. In a really great way. Okay, so Chaya's going to drop the source sheet into the chat if she hasn't already. And I'm going to also share my screen, and then we will, thank you, Chaya. And then we'll get right to it. Okie dokie, here we go. Okay, so we're around the same time period as we were last week. So we're definitely in the same world of like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Romans and like Roman power. And there's a little bit, there were a few like directions that this could have gone in also. Like we're going to be talking about the time period when Rabbi Meir was after the Ptirato shel Rabbi Meir, which is just interesting because on the one hand, it seems like it's the death of Rabbi Meir, and on the other hand, in Masachet Avodah Zarah, for those of you, I know I just mentioned the Bruria story, so for those of you familiar with the Bruria story, that's where we get that amazing Rashi, which describes that horrific death of Bruria. And it's on Rabbi Meir not actually dying, but fleeing Eretz Yisrael to Babel. And so, like, what does it mean, Ptirato shel Rabbi Meir? Ptira can mean both to die and to leave, and Hebrew does that on purpose. And so it's a little bit interesting, like, what actually is this time period that we're going to be talking about in the Gemara? Is it after this like horrible thing happened to Rabbi Meir's family, and Rabbi Meir kind of flees and stops teaching Torah and all of that? Or is it actually like, no, Rabbi Meir has died? But it's clearly a time period where you have a dissolution of the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Meir. And that's our time period for today. But before we can really get into that, we have to dive into a different thing, which is like just our topic of conversation. So we have to look at the Mishnah before we get too far here. So the Mishnah says, Makadesh bechelko, so a priest who betrothed a woman using his portion of a sacrifice, ben kache kadashim, ben kachim kalim, no matter what level of sacrifice. So we know like there's some sacrifices, for example, that are like an olah where the priest actually doesn't have any portion in it because with an olah it all gets burned. Then we have some sacrifices where only the priests are the only humans who eat it, only the Kohanim eat it. And then there's some sacrifices where not only do the Kohanim eat it, but also the person who brought it eats it. And also maybe they like the Korban Toda. In order to eat all of it, you have to like invite a million friends because otherwise you would be on some kind of crazy carbohydrate high for the rest of your life. Right. So there's different kinds of Corbano and they have like kind of different statuses of who eats them and where they're eaten. The Korban Pesach being one of the most interesting ones where you take it home with you to eat it and all of that. So, okay, so Makadosh Bechalko, Ben Kache Kadashim, Ben Kachim Kalim, Ina Mekadashin. So you cannot do, a Kohen cannot effectuate Kiddushin, says the Tanakh of the Mishnah, says the first voice of the Mishnah, with a piece of a sacrifice that is either of the most sacred order or an offering of a less sacred order. The Maser Sheni, Ben Shogeg, Ben Mezid, Lo Kiddush. So then the question is, what if someone wants to betroth a woman with Maser Sheni? This is no longer a priest. Anyone brings Maser Sheni. Maser Sheni is a tithe. That's maybe, I think it was Rabbi Mishhammer Kasoy who describes this on the Your Torah podcast as like a vacation fund, which is really stuck with me. So Maser Sheni is a tithe that you have to bring to Jerusalem and eat in Jerusalem. So it's like a tenth of your whole produce for that year, which is really quite a lot of food. So then it's like, well, what do? Maybe you leave it behind and then the scholars who are in Jerusalem get to eat the leftovers. Like there's all kinds of like nice stuff about Maser Sheni. But the question is, can you do Kiddushin with your Maser Sheni? And the answer, according to Rabbi Meir, is no. Rabbi Yehuda says, B'shogeg lo Kiddush, b'mezid Kiddush. So Rabbi Yehuda says, by accident, you did not effectuate Kiddushin. Like if you didn't know that the thing you were doing Kiddushin with was Maser Sheni, maybe that's what the shogeg here is. Then because you can't do Kiddushin by accident. So the shogeg has to be about what the item was. So maybe if he didn't know it was Maser Sheni, then it doesn't work. But if he does it on purpose, then it does work. So b'mezid still involves some kind of like violation. Otherwise, it wouldn't be totally permissible. Anyways, this isn't really the direction we're going in, but it's a very interesting Mishnah. Uvehekdesh b'mezid kidesh b'shogeg lo kidesh divrei Rabbi Meir. So with an item that is consecrated property to the Beit HaMikdash. So let's say, I don't know, like a wedding ring that like a gold ring that someone said this is designated to the Beit HaMikdash, and then tries to, before maybe while it's still in there, like they're still holding on to it on behalf of the Beit HaMikdash at that point, they try to do Kiddushin with it, they try to effectuate a betrothal with it. So Rabbi Meir says, if you tried to effectuate that betrothal on purpose, you're stealing from the temple essentially, but it still works. But if you did it by accident, then it doesn't work. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, B'shogeg kidesh b'mezi lo kidesh. And Rabbi Yehuda says the opposite. If you did it by accident, that actually, you didn't know it was hekdesh, you didn't know it was designated to the temple, then you have effectuated Kiddushin. But if you did it on purpose, then you have not effectuated Kiddushin. So that's really interesting. Yeah, Alana, I'm glad you like the vacation fund thing. I think it's really awesome. Also, anyone who's not familiar with the Your Torah podcast, it's just really great. Okay. it's not a Drisha project, but I did contribute to it, so I feel okay. Telling you that it's excellent. Okay, so that's our Mishnah. The most important part of the Mishnah, the one that we're going to be zooming in on, is this, Hamakadesh Bechalko, right? The priest who's trying to effectuate a betrothal with his portion. It doesn't work, says the Mishnah. Okay, so now we're in the time period that I was describing before. We have a Breita that's describing La'achar P'tirato Shel Rabbi Meir, after Rabbi Meir fled, died, left. Doesn't really matter, because the point is you have a Beit Midrash of Rabbi Meir without Rabbi Meir at the helm. That's the point, okay? So we have La'achar P'tirato Shel Rabbi Meir, Amar Lahem Rabbi Yehuda L'Talmidav. Rabbi Yehuda said to his students. So you have Rabbi Meir, he's gone. Rabbi Yehuda is a contemporary of Rabbi Meir, and he's still around. And he says to his students in his Beit Midrash, Al yikansu talmidei Rabbi Meir lekan. Do not let Rabbi Meir's students into here. Mibnei shekantranim hem, which is just a great word. They are contrarians. Kantranim hem. Velo lilmod Torah hem ba'im, and they're not coming to really learn Torah. Ela lekapchani b'halachot hem ba'im, but they're coming to overwhelm me with halachot. So what happens next? Dachak sumchus v'nechnas. Sumchus pushes his way in and enters anyway. Sumchus is a student of Rabbi Meir. Dachak v'nechnas. Amar lahem, and he says to them, Kach shanali Rabbi Meir. This is something Rabbi Meir taught me. Amakadesh bechalko ben kache kadashim ben kachim kalim lo kidesh. The one who tries to betroth, a priest who tries to betroth a woman with his portion of the sacrifice, whether they're kache kadashim, whether they're kachim kalim, doesn't work either way, lo kidesh, right? So this is what's so amazing here is like you see the Mishnah in process, right? So the Mishnah it's not like Sumchu says like, here's the Mishnah, this is what it says. Instead, we see Sumchus quoting something that we now know to be the Mishnah, but Sumchus lives before the Mishnah is codified, and he's just quoting his teacher, Rabbi Meir, and saying, this is Rabbi Meir's teaching. Okay. Ka'as Rabbi Yehuda aleihem. Rabbi Yehuda is angry with his students. Amar lahem, and he says to them, Lo kach amarti lachem, didn't I tell you? Ali kansumi talmidei Rabbi Meir lakan. Didn't I tell you not to let Rabbi Meir's students into here? Mimnei shekantranim hem, because they are contrarian. V'lo lilmod Torah hem ba'im, and they didn't come here to learn Torah. Ela lekapchani b'halachot hem ba'im, but they came to overwhelm me with halachot. V'chi isha ba'azara minayin. Why would there be a woman in the temple courtyard? Says, now you're understanding why I think this is from this text. Says Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir dismisses the question out of hand.
Okay. Hi everyone. We seem to have momentarily lost Rabbanit Sarna. I'm going to share this the source sheet so that we can at least, look at the sources while that is dealt with. And bear with us, please.
Okay. So Rashi says, right, so what does it mean? He says, women are allowed Rashi admits that women are allowed into that Ezrat Nashim. So what does it mean? Like there's literally a courtyard called the Ezrat Nashim, and it's called that because women are allowed to be there. But he says, well, when we're talking about Kadshe Kadashim, when we're talking about the highest order of sacrifice, so if you take them out of the courtyard where the priests usually were into the Ezrat Nashim, then that actually you've taken them kind of too far, and that's and you're not allowed to bring them there. And women aren't in the place where aren't outside of the Ezrat Nashim where they normally where Kodshe Kadashim level of sacrifices would normally be brought. That's Rashi's opinion. Tosfot takes Rashi to town. Tosfot is like, Rashi, that's a horrible read. And they say, so Tosfot quotes Rashi.
Good?
Yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so you're in the Tosfot. Okay. Okay, perfect. So So then he says, right, we don't see in any place that women aren't allowed to enter the Azara, because it says in the first parak of Kalim, which is part of the Mishnah, it says, it says, it gives all I'm not going to read this fully, but it gives all these different levels of different parts of the Beit HaMikdash that would have, like the chel is the like atrium is holy because someone who's tamei mate, someone who has the impurity of death, can't go into there. And then above that, you have the Ezrat Yisrael, someone who hasn't achieved atonement yet, can't go into there. And above that, you have the Ezrat Kohanim, where Yisraelim can't go into there. Ella, but it's not that they can never go into there. They can go into there. So there's the Ezrat Kohanim that typically regular Israeli and regular Jews can't go into, but they can go in there in order to do smicha, to do the laying of hands onto their sacrifice. They can go into there in order to slaughter a sacrifice that they brought, or to wave if you have like a grain offering or whatever that requires weaving. The Omer classically gets waved. You might know about that. So you would go into there, and the Omer is a communal offering, but like the Bikurim get waved, for example. So your Bikurim get waved. The Lokatani Nashim, but this Mishnah in Kalim, point out the Tosfot importantly, does not mention women as, for example, women don't go into some place, right? It would say, right, the same way that they say Israelites don't go into this place except to do these things, you would think it would say, and women don't go into there, say the Tosfot, and Velokatani Nashim she'en nichnesot sham, and it doesn't say that women don't go into there. And more than that, we know from Zvachim shehashchita ksher b'nashim that women are allowed to do shchita, they're allowed to do their own slaughter. So a woman who brings a korban, if you're supposed to go into the Ezrat Kohanim in order to do your shchita, and women are allowed to do shchita, then of course women, say the Tosfot, are going into the Ezrat Kohanim. And then he says, therefore she should be allowed to go into the Azara. And more than that, say the Tosfot, Hare Sota v'Nezira nichnaso ba'azara lahanif. The Sota and the female Nazir go into the Azara because they have waving as part of their sacrifices. L'kach nir ali, this is what it seems to me. So what does it mean? V'chi shaba azara minayin? What the Gemara really means to say, what Rabbi Meir what Rabbi Yehuda is saying here is v'chi shaba azara lihit kadesh minayin. Why is there a woman in the courtyard of the Kohanim getting betrothed? Right? It's not a normal thing to go into there to get engaged. It's not like it's not like the like the steps of Lincoln Square or whatever, Lincoln Center, where everyone gets engaged. Like, no, that's not what this place is. It's not a normal engagement venue, the Ezrat Kohanim, and therefore, and the reason why is Shahari Bizayonhu Meltadlo Shchichahi. It's disgraceful to the place, to the Ezrat Kohanim, and it's something that didn't happen. But that's Tosfot's understanding of Rabbi. That's Tosfot's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Ozzy says, okay, I can't really, I got the gist of it when it popped up, but because I'm on my phone, because of internet struggles, I couldn't fully read it. But you said, what about Kachim Kalim? Can't they be eaten any place can't they be eaten in many more places? And the answer to that is yes, but you have to play on Rashi's terms, meaning the Mishnah doesn't distinguish between Kache Kadashim and Kachin Kalim. And so when the Mishnah rejects it, the Mishnah needs to be rejecting it kind of on on both as a group. Like there's a low plug. There's we don't distinguish between kache kadashim and kache kalim. So Rashi says, yeah, the reason that it's rejected is because women aren't even allowed in there. And then Tosfot says, why do you think women aren't even allowed in there? For sure they're allowed in there. The Mishnah says explicitly they're allowed in there if anyone who's going to do shchita or waving, anyone who's going to slaughter or wave is in there. And women are commanded to do waving and are permitted to do slaughter, and therefore they must be in there. But what's actually Rabbi Yehuda's problem when he says, V'chi isha ba'azara minayin, what is a woman doing in that part of the courtyard, in the presumably the Kohanim part of the courtyard? The answer is, she shouldn't, it's not a good engagement venue. That's basically Tosfot's answer, which is really, I think, a really great answer. Okay. But now let's go back we're at the beginning of page 2, Chaya. It should start Amar Rabbi Yossi. There you go, perfect. Okay, so now, right, we had Rabbi Meir, he's dead, let's say. We have Rabbi Yehuda, and he's really angry, and the scene is taking place in Rabbi Yehuda's Beit Midrash, but Rabbi Yossi is there. So Amar Rabbi Yossi says to himself, Yossi says to himself, Yomru, they will say, Meir shachav, Rabbi Meir died, Yehuda ka'as, Rabbi Yehuda got angry, and Yossi shatak, and if I don't say anything, then I'm going to be Yossi who was quiet. And in that case, where one is dead, one is angry, and one is quiet, Divrei Torah matahel, what's going to happen to the Torah? If one is dead and one is angry and one is quiet, what's going to happen to the Torah? So what does that mean? It means that we jeopardize the Torah, okay? When people who are containers of Torah die, it jeopardizes the Torah. That's easy enough to understand. When people who are angry, they jeopardize the Torah too. And Rabbi Yossi is quiet. And people who don't speak up, they also jeopardize the Torah. And if someone is dead and someone is angry and someone is quiet, what's going to happen to the Torah? So then Rabbi Yossi says, all right, we got to speak up. Here's what he says. Couldn't a man, he kind of accepts, he seems to disagree with Tosfot, by the way. He seems to think it's just about being a woman. Could a man accept Kiddushin on behalf of his daughter in the Azara? And couldn't a woman send a messenger to act on her behalf to receive a betrothal in the courtyard? V'od, and here's a great part, dachka v'nechnesa mai. What if she just pushes herself in? So is it so bad to push yourself in somewhere? I guess that's my question. Because within the story, it's not meant to be lost on you that she's not the first person to be dachka v'nechnasa. Sumchus also was dachak v'nichnas. If you scroll up just a tiny bit, you will see dachak, sumchus, v'nichnas. There you got it. Dachak, sumchus, v'nichnas. So Sumchus pushes his way in, and this woman pushes her way in to the Azara. And we don't really see, we see Rabbi Meir we see Rabbi Yehuda being mad at Sumchus for pushing his way in, but ultimately, it doesn't seem like Rabbi Yossi thinks Sumchus did the wrong thing by pushing his way in. In fact, right, more than that, right? Meir died, Yehuda was angry, Yossi was quiet. But what if when Meir dies, his students get totally kicked out, right? It seems like Rabbi Yossi says it's actually important that Sumchus be welcomed here. It's actually important that the Torah of Rabbi Meir live on through his students, and that the students of Rabbi Meir, not just with those particular teachings, it's not just, right, that Rabbi Meir was made angry, not just by the Torah that was brought in, but almost like the culture that Torah represents, that there needs to be, says Rabbi Yossi, a certain type of tolerance in Torah, that we can allow for teachings of halachot that maybe we think are like, I don't know, kind of dumb, are like kind of weird or kind of annoying or overwhelming, right? Like kapchani b'halachot, that they're maybe like too specific, or they're not what we do in our Beit Midrash. Says Rabbi Yossi, if we make claims like that, angry claims that end up closing the door against students who have this living push himself in. So he pushes himself in, and then what? and then he gets yelled at and he gets made fun of. And Rabbi Yossi says, if this is what happens, what's going to happen to the Torah? And that actually we need like a more maybe like multicultural Beit Midrash environment. And what's going to happen to the Torah if we don't open our mouths to make sure that that happens? So here we have a case of Divrei Torah Mataha Alaha that's coming to say there needs to be a lot of voices in the Torah. And it's important that the Torah be multivocal, and it's important that the doors of the Beit Midrash be open. And it's important that we not get angry too easily and shut people down too easily. Because if we do that, and if we close ranks, then what will happen to the Torah? So that's the Divrei Torah Matahela, what will happen to the Torah. That's Rabbi Yossi's version of what it means to protect the Torah. So the feminist read here is that just like people tried to keep Simchus out, people tried to keep this woman out of the Azara, and yet she pushed her way in. And is it good that she pushed her way in? It seems like it. It seems like it's so good that if they hadn't let her in and if she hadn't done her thing, then we wouldn't have this case. And Divrei Torah Matahalehem if she hadn't pushed her way in. And that may be part of the multiculturalism that's required in Torah environments is women pushing their way into places where maybe they weren't wanted. And more than that, then along come Tosfot, obviously, whatever it is, 1300 years after Rabbi Meir, and say, yeah, but we think actually women probably were there anyways, which is also a pretty amazing piece of this puzzle to have. So I definitely kind of want to leave you with this woman who pushes her way in, and that by pushing her way in is saving the Torah the same way that Simchus is, but neither of them can do it without allies, right? She pushes her way in, and there's a Kohen there waiting to get betrothed to her. She knows she's wanted on the inside, and Simchus finds an ally for himself in Rabbi Yossi. And he knows that there's going to be someone there who's not going to be quiet about making sure that his voice is heard and his Torah is respected and ultimately preserved. So that's also a few different pieces of kind of maybe a feminist read on this text that are reads that I really treasure and really love. And the Gemara really goes on to debate it. It gets taken seriously, because then you have Rabbi Yehuda, Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, yeah, maybe in the case where she sent in a messenger or where she forces her way in, maybe it works. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mikudeshet, right? Rabbi Yehuda says, yeah, she's betrothed. Rabbi Yossi says, after Rabbi Yossi defends Simchus and says, let him in, Rabbi Yossi says, Eina Mikudeshet. He says, but the betrothal doesn't work, which is on the one hand, chaval, because we're all kind of rooting for this woman who pushes her way in. And on the other hand, he's upholding Rabbi Meir's teaching, who says that she's not Mikudeshet. And then a few generations later, we have the Amora Rabbi Yochanan. He says, Shneihem Mikra Achad Darshu. They're both deriving their opinions from one verse. The verse is this: Zeh yelecha mikodesh hakodashim min ha'ish. This shall be yours of the most holy things, reserved from the fire. Rabbi Yehuda explains it to me, and Rabbi Yehuda savar lach Rabbi Yehuda savar lecha ulekol tzarchaka, for you and for all your needs, i.e., you can use your chilek for whatever you want. You're a Kohen, you get a piece of a Korban, it's for you and for your needs. Rabbi Yossi savar keish. Rabbi Yossi says, no, it's similar to the portion that's burned on the fire, ma ish la achila, afhu nami la achila. The part that goes onto the fire is to be consumed by the fire, and the priest's portion is also for consumption alone. You have a sacrifice, it needs to be eaten. Some of it gets eaten by the fire on the mizbeach, some of it gets eaten by the priests. That's what happens to these kadshe kadashim. They are not for you to use for other things. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, but seems to be kind of paralleling Rabbi Meir. And that was Rabbi Yochanan's explanation of the debate between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. And then Rabbi Yochanan goes on and says, Nimnu v'gamru. They counted the opinions amongst the sages. They took a vote, Nimnu v'gamru, and decided Hamakadosh v'chalko ben kadshe kadshin ben kadshin kalim lo kiddush. And they decide, like Rabbi Meir, like Rabbi Yossi, that the betrothal does not work. But Rav says, so now we move from Amoraim and Eretz Yisrael of Rabbi Yochanan to Rav, and then we'll see Abaye, who are Amoraim of different generations in Bavel. So Rav Amar Adayan Hi Machloket. Rav says the debate actually still stands. Amar Abaye Kavate the Rabbi Yochanan Mistavra, and Abaye, a few generations later than Rav, but also still in Bavel, says, no, actually, I hold like the report of Rabbi Yochanan, who says that they took a vote and decided in favor of Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara there goes on all about this. It's like really amazing. But the whole possibility of the Gemara to have so much teaching about this subject is due to Sumchus pushing his way in and then inspiring Rabbi Yossi to speak up in favor of the preservation of Rabbi Meir's teachings and of the preservation of the culture of Rabbi Meir's Beit Midrash, which is what gave rise to these teachings, and also gives rise to the possibility that women would just push themselves into parts of the Beit HaMikdash in which they do not belong, or in which they might not be welcome, except for, of course, the Kohen who loves it and wants to marry her for it. So I'm so glad we got to look at this text together. In the last 20 minutes or so, before we keep going, we have to look at the Mahari Brona. I apologize. So the Mahari Brona, I just want to take it home. The Mahari Brona is a little bit later than anything we've looked at so far. So he's in German. He's a German rabbi and posek. He gets quoted by the Ramah, like he's this very important Ashkenazi posek, and he's in like 1400 to 1480 in like Moravia, Germany, that part of the world. And he just is a part of like a much longer kind of thing. But when you have, he says, so you have a student in, let's say, yeshiva, whatever, who has a debate or maybe is bringing to a court a claim against another, or another person has a claim against the student. And the student thinks that the halacha is on his side in this case. And his rabbi thinks that the law is with the other guy in the case. And the student wants to go kind of like appeal his case to the great rabbis of that generation. Is he allowed? Meaning that's complicated, right? Because that student's very teacher ruled against him. So you might just say, no, like your teacher said you're wrong. Sit down. You lost. It's okay. Like that's what happens. Someone's gonna lose here, and that's it. So the Mahari Brona says, "Pshita she'ein koach l'rav she'igzor alav she'achzor bo." If the student wants to appeal, clearly the student's teacher needs to allow it. Clearly, the student's teacher is not allowed to force a decree on the student to backtrack against his claim. De'im kain, because if that were what needed to happen, and rabbis could just enforce their opinions on their students and not allow their students to appeal and not allow their students to like work towards their own opinions, Torah matahala. What would happen to the Torah? I think this is a very Rabbi Yossi-like approach to this question, which is to say, if we force our will somewhere and we say the Torah can only speak with one voice and it's my voice and everyone has to agree with me, and if you don't agree with me, get out of my Beit Midrash and I'm going to make a gzera against you and I'm going to use all the power that I have to kind of rile against you. What's going to happen to the Torah if we use our power, our Torah power in that way? And in fact, right, you have to allow the student, says the Mahari Brona, you have to allow the student to go and appeal and work towards their own opinion, which I just think is like, I think that, you know, for this to be like the is just really great. That even, you know, in the 1400s, people say, when people say, Ozzy, I saw what you just wrote. I'm going to say in a second. People say, let them ask questions to the Torah. It was for changing his opinions when the students made interesting or important insights, or for if a student asks a question to say that, sorry, I gotta move my phone because apparently it's starting to overheat because we're just having all the technical difficulties today. If the Rav was known for, if a student asked him like, what do you think about this? Then he would maybe say back to the student, like, tell me what you think, which is also really great. So those are all of our cases about this particular case. But I want to take it home with this amazing Midrash from Esther Rabbah. So scroll down if you can. By the way, Sefaria just put out this new translation of Midrash Rabbah. It's great. Once upon a time when I wanted to like put a translation of Midrash Rabbah on a source sheet, I had to like call up my mom, have her take a picture of her English Midrash Rabbah, or I had to write it myself. Obviously, I could do that too. But now there's just a new original and quite good translation on Sefaria of the Midrash Rabbah, and that's just really a treat. So thanks to Sefaria. Okay. So here we go. So we're in the story of Esther. Amar Haman la'Achashverosh. Haman says to Achashverosh, Elohim shel elu soneh zima. The God of these people hates licentiousness. So in order to manipulate their God into like punishing them, essentially, what should we do? Amid lahem zonot vasalahem mishteh. They provide them. What we should do is provide them with prostitutes. Make a banquet for them. The gazar lehem she'avo kulam v'yochlu v'yishtu v'yasu kirtzonam, and decree that they all have to come and they have to eat and they drink. And as the pasuk says, right, lasu kirtzon ish vayish. So now it's not right. It's recasting the first chapter of Esther. We're putting Haman into the story at that point, which in the book of Esther, Haman is not in the story then. And we're saying that it was already this like entrapment scheme, that the point of it was like, let's get him. Okay. So Mordechai sees this and he says, this is a disaster. Kivan Shara Mordechai Kach Amad V'Chris Lehem V'Amar Lehem Lo Tilchu Le'Achol B'Sudato Shel Achashverosh. Right, once Mordechai sees what's happening, he stands up and he says to them, don't go to eat at this banquet. This is a disaster. ואמר להם, לא תוכלו לאכול בסעודתו, שלא הזמין אתכם כי אם ללמד אתכם קטגוריה כדי שיהיה פתחון פה עם מידת הדין, לקטרג לכם לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא. Don't go, because the only reason why they want you to go is so that there will be a basis for the prosecutor to prosecute you before God. But unfortunately, we all know the people didn't listen. Lo shamu l'divrei Mordechai. And everyone went to Achashverosh's banquet. Okay. And we have this kind of description by Rabbi Ishmael of how many people went. 18,500. They went, they ate, they drank, they became intoxicated, they became corrupted. Okay, Miyad. Amad Satan v'hilshin alehem. I'm in the third line down of that paragraph. The Satan gets up and starts to inform on them before God. Amar lefanav ribono shalom ad matai tidabik be'umazo. God, how long are you going to stick with this horrible people? Shehem mafrishim levavam ve'emunatam imacha. They remove their heart and their trust from you. Im ritzoncha abedu mazo min haolam. If you want, you should just get rid of this people from the world. Just abolish them from the world. Ki einam ba'im b'tshuva lefanacha. They're not coming to do tshuva before you. Stop waiting for them. Stop waiting for it to get better. This people is terrible. Get rid of them, says the Satan to God. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God self says, Torah mataheleha. What's going to happen to the Torah if we get rid of them? Amar lefanav, the Satan says back to God, Ribbono shel tistapik be'elyonim. He says the Torah will be satisfied to be learned by angels. V'gam yishveh da'atolim chodei Yisrael. And really, God was convinced. God says, what's going to happen to the Torah? And more or less the Satan convinces God that really the Torah doesn't need the Jews. And God's assumption was the Torah needs the Jews, and therefore I can't cut off the Jews because what's going to happen to the Torah? And the Satan says, why does the Torah need the Jews? The Torah could be learned by angels. Everything will be fine. Not so different from the response that Yannai gets, right? Yannai says, what's going to happen to the Torah? The answer is put it in a corner, and whoever wants will come and learn. Right? It's that same idea that the Torah doesn't actually need to live in relationship with people. The Torah can just exist, and it'll, whatever. It'll be fine as it is. Tistafik be'elyonim, says the Satan. And he shveh da'ato limchot Israel. He convinced God to destroy the Jews. V'otoshak amar Kadosh Baruch Hu la'amali uma shebishvila her beiti otutam v'v'tai l'kol kamim alei l'ra'ah. God says, I worked so hard for this nation. I made so many signs and wonders against all the people who rose up against them. What do I need this for? Says God to God's self. Let me terminate their memory from man. That's from Hazidu. God finally decides, I'm so angry at them, I'm just going to get rid of them. So then God says, okay, we're doing it. God says to the Satan, bring me a scroll, right? It's cute. Bring me a Megillah. And I will write on it for their destruction. And so Satan brings God the Megillah and starts writing on it. Miyad yatzta haTorah bebigdei almanut. At that moment, the Torah comes out in widow's garb. The Torah in widow's garb. And she raises her voice in weeping before God. And the ministering angels also call along with her, scream along with her. And they all say together, the Torah and the ministering angels together, they say, if there's no Jews, what are we needed for? The Torah and the ministering angels come together to say, and the Torah dressed as a widow, mourning the potential loss of her people, say, there's no point in me. What's going to happen to me if the Jewish people are destroyed, asks the Torah. There's no point in me at all if the Jewish people are destroyed. So we have God saying the actual words of Torah mataheleha, but almost in this King Yannai kind of way, and gets almost basically the answer that Yannai gets, but the Torah here comes out to kind of rebuke that answer. The Torah comes out to defend herself and say, that is a terrible answer. There is no point to me if that is your answer, says the Torah herself. And then a lot of people all of a sudden come to the Torah's defense. So Tosha'a, Rat Eliyahu Zachar Tov B'Vahala Etzel Avot Haolam Etzel Moshe ben Amram. So Elijah goes to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe, and says to them, "Wake up! Ad matai avod olam redumim b'shina? V'yatam mashgichim al hatzara shebnechem shriim ba. Ki malchei Ashuri v'chama v'levana v'kochavim mazalu v'shamayim v'aretz v'chol tzva hamaron bochim b'merar v'atam umdim mineged v'enam mashgichim." So he says, "Wake up! Why are you guys not paying attention to the suffering of the Jews? The angels and we skipped this part, but the sun and the moon and all the stars also are coming to the angels and to the Torah's defense." And he says, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, well, how are you sleeping through this? Like, wake up, do something. And they say, why should we do anything? They say, why, like, what's happening? Like, why does God want to wipe them out? And he says, well, they enjoyed the Suda of Achashverosh, and now God wants to destroy them. And so now, Chai, you should scroll down, by the way. We're on the next page, yeah. So they say, wait, but like, if God is mad at them, like, what are we supposed to do about it? So Eliyahu goes to Moshe. Chazar Eliyahu v'amar lo Moshe, ro'en eman. If you are loyal, you're a loyal shepherd. And yeah, it says like, how many times have you stood in the breach on Israel's behalf and you have successfully canceled God's decree against them? Like, do it again. And so Moshe says, okay, is there a chance at this? Decides there is, because there's a guy named Mordechai. And he says, okay, fine. So have Mordechai and his people go stand over there in daven, and I, Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to go stand over here in daven, and we'll all daven for the Jews. Nevakesh rachamim aleichem lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then Eliyahu says, and we'll all kind of daven as all together. And Eliyahu says, okay, but it's already been written. Just so you know, like the Igeret has already been written. And Moshe says, what is it written in? Im batiti chatumat filatinu nishmat. If it's been written in mortar, our prayer will be heard. But if it's been sealed in blood, it will not be heard. And then Amar lo batiti chatumah. He says back to him, it's sealed in mortar. Okay, Moshe says, fine, go get Mordechai. We're doing it. Miyad halach v'odil Mordechai. Right, so he went and they got Mordechai. Mordechai yada right? Mordechai heard about everything that happened. Vayikra Mordechai begadav, and Mordechai tore his clothes. So Kevan shegidu Esther, and then he told Esther. And here's where the blood comes in, because then the blood pours out of it, and the people are saved. So, right? So they tell Esther, she's greatly agitated. What does it mean? What's the meaning that she was agitated? Sheparsa nida, that Esther began menstruating, which is just super fascinating in the context of, well, if it's written in blood, then it can't be undone. And they say, oh, it's not written in blood. And in fact, where's the blood? The blood is running out of Esther. There's no blood to be had because she's menstruating all that blood out. It's like a little bit of a gross image, but I do think it's like a cool image that ultimately the permanence, the potential, the threat of permanence and the threat of God destroying the Jews flows out through Esther's body, and the people are saved. But the people are saved not because God asked the right question, but because the Torah stood up for herself and said, I reject the answer to your question. And that really, when you have the right question, you could still have the wrong answer. Kadosh Baruch Hu, God's self, could get the wrong answer. And then along comes the Torah to defend herself and provide the right one and say the Torah has to be in relationship with the Jews. It doesn't that requires something of the Jews, though. It requires Mordechai, and it requires Esther, and maybe it requires someone like Rabbi Yossi. People have to raise up their voices in defense of the Torah, in defense of the Jews, in defense of the Jews' relationship with the Torah, for sure. The first step is definitely to ask the question, to take responsibility, to stand in defense of the Torah. And we have to learn what it means to stand in defense of the Torah, for sure. And we can learn that from here. We see the Torah herself standing in her own defense. And previously we saw Rabbi Yossi standing in the Torah's defense. And all of that is I think, really good fodder to answer this question as we come up on Shavuos of what does receiving the Torah require of us? And I think what it requires of us to take is to fight for our relationship with the Torah, to ask this question of what's going to happen to the Torah. And if we see the wrong answer being answered, to fight for the right answer to be answered. And to know what that right answer is. That right answer is the Torah needs the Jews need to be alive, the Jews need to be healthy, the Jews need to be multivocal, they need to have Batei Midrash where the Torah is studied, and where the Torah is studied to its fullest degree to be studied in many ways, not just by people who are in Kollel day to night, full time, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son. Maybe we need some of those people, but maybe in addition to some of those people, we need everyone else also just doing their part, making it work, fitting it in whenever they have time. And the other voices we need are the voices of everyone, people of all different cultures, people with all different learning styles, people who like to ask really annoying questions and bring up annoying havaminas and lekapchari v'halachot, and to overwhelm with halachot. People who like a different Torah, they should be there too. And if they don't, if the doors of the Beit Midrash aren't open to all those people, they should push and make a space for themselves, because that too is an answer to what is to become of the Torah. Part of the answer to that question, part of the correct answer to that question, is that the Torah is for all the Jews, and you have to fight your way in, and you have to open doors and if you're on the inside, you have to be the ally who opens the door and speaks up on behalf of the people who fought their way in. That is maybe what it means to stand up for the Torah. I'm so sorry again about all technical difficulties tonight. I would never have chosen it. I really just most sincerely apologize. I know how frustrating it is to have it be in, out, off, on, what's happening, where'd she go? I know it's terrible. Chaya, you can stop sharing if you want now. But I really appreciate y'all sticking with me. And I'm glad, thank you, Alana, for sticking with me. I'm glad you enjoyed. I really hope that the share would be like the cherry on top of the series. So I'm a little bit disappointed that the technical difficulties got in the way, but I appreciate that you all stuck with me. Off topic, this depiction of Eliyahu is fascinating and so unlike how we generally think of him, for sure. Rabbi Silver actually has taught about that in the past. You can find it in our audio library. And just a plug for the Jerisha High School program, where he'll be teaching on that exact topic again, but it's not on Zoom or available to the public. But if you have a high school student you love and want to send as a spy, you can do that. And he'll be teaching on Eliyahu in both of the two depictions, right? Because this is the depiction of Eliyahu that comes to the Brit Milah or visits our Seder, but it's not the depiction of Eliyahu in the Torah for sure. Eliyahu in Tanakh would be like, kill them all, yes, they don't deserve to live. But it is the more soft and gentle Eliyahu of the Agadic imagination. So for sure, good point.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbanit Sarna, for this absolutely fascinating series. When I first saw the topic, I was really intrigued by the choice to call it "What Will Become of Her" as opposed to "What Will Become of It." And one of the things I really enjoyed is really seeing the Torah as a character, as distinct from Hashem's opinions about it and people's opinions about it or her. So that's been really interesting, and I've really enjoyed all this about asking the right questions and all these different conversations about again, like he said, what it is to receive the Torah. So thank you so much. And thank you so much to everybody who joined us on Zoom, on Facebook, and on Drisha Live. We're going to continue with Rabbi Silber's Genesis class on Sunday at 10 a.m. And we're going to continue our Talmud Torah pre-Shavuos Sphira programming with Rabbi Zakir teaching about the scope of Torah on Sunday evening. And as well, I just want to make a quick reference to the applications for our summer kollel programs, both the virtual and in-person programs. The deadline has been extended to next Monday. So it's going to be like a really amazing program. There's really exciting topics and really exciting teachers. So please check it out at kollel.drisha.org. And you can find more information about all of our programs at drisha.org/classes. And yeah, so thank you again to Rabbanit Sarna for this amazing opportunity. And we hope to see everyone again soon.